Welcome to the All Things Real Estate Podcast with our very own Josh Barker. With more than 20 years of experience and over 5,000 properties sold, Josh brings a unique perspective to the real estate market. Let's get started.
Okay, it's been a little bit. I'm here with Josh Barker.
Hello.
I missed last month. Mike Medley was in here. I saw that.
Yes, he was. Yeah. We did miss you, Joey. I'm really glad that you got to come back and visit again. So,
I saw Mike and I immediately said, you know what I loved is that he brought up the fact of the capital gains tax law change in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And how that, because I brought that up and other people like glaze over, like, no, maybe that had an effect. I'm like, that had a huge effect. Look at the average time people had a home now.
Yes.
I mean, they were just flipping home every 24 months.
Yep.
And that, I mean, can you imagine if they did that with the stock market? They're like, well, if you hold a stock 6 months, you can sell it. And I mean, that would immediately,
it would change the investment pattern.
it would change it huge.
Yeah. And it did that for housing. And I think that was the perception that Mike was sharing. And it was a good perspective.
I thought so too.
Yeah, I liked it. And it did. It changed volume for sure. And it gave a whole nother avenue for investors. So for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, just go back to our previous month's market update podcast, and you'll see an interview that we did with Mike Medley, 30-year broker, been in Reading a long time, and really shared a really cool story about the real estate market. So we've got a whole nother set of facts that are kind of hitting the ground right now this month, though, huh?
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm watching all the realtors around there kind of start talking about it finally. It's like, really becoming aware of what's happening.
So like some of the things that are happening, I mean, this would be episode 3 or 4 in a row where we said interest rates are rising, but they've actually come down a little bit, right? I mean, I've seen some lenders, I'm on a couple of their email threads, and they're like, hey, interest rates came down 0.5 point.
From 6.5 to 6.
I've been even high fives, which historically, if you said, hey, you can get a home loan in the fives, that people would be like, oh my goodness.
Compared to what, right?
Yeah, compared to historical. It's just that we've come out of, when have interest rates been below 3% for mortgage rates? Ever?
Well, yeah, exactly. And maybe for our listeners, maybe that would be a good thing to talk about today first, is just the misconception around what the Federal Reserve is doing and how it's having an impact on the mortgage interest rates. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the difference between the feds do something to the rate, but what does that actually do to mortgage rates?
Right. When they move their rate up, why is that not necessarily transferring directly over to the mortgage market? And so, like you're hearing, and you're probably going to hear by the end of this month that inflation was at what 9.1%, which isn't good. If anybody's wondering, the targeted numbers
40-year high.
Yeah, 40-year high, and the target numbers in the low 2s. And so they feel like they've got some runway now to raise that discount rate up even more now. And so they're looking at raising the Federal Reserve's interest rate by up to 1%. So
it's huge.
It is huge. I think it's going to be, for most of the experts out there, they're saying between 0.75% and 1%. So I think you can debate all you want on those two numbers, but it's probably one of those two numbers. Either one is a lot of pressure on demand. Because as interest rates go up, it has an impact on what people can buy or how much they can buy or what they can borrow and those kind of things. Anyhow, on the mortgage rate side, why you're seeing rates actually coming down is that it has a lot more to do with mortgage-backed securities. So 6 months ago, the mortgage-backed securities, they were reducing the number of mortgage-backed securities they were purchasing. And that meant that the private market had to step in and start buying these mortgage-backed securities. And that's where the interest rates went up, almost overnight, it felt like, right?
Yep.
It
did fast.
Yeah, the 30-year mortgage has almost doubled pretty much in the last 6 to 8 months. And a lot of that's because the Federal Reserve stopped purchasing mortgage-backed securities at the same level they were. That caused the private market to step in. Private market said, hey, I'm not going to buy mortgages at 3.5%, but I will buy them at 6%, right? Mm-hmm. And so the interest rates have gone up. So even though the Federal Reserve is likely going to be moving the rate up, the Federal Reserve rate up, it doesn't necessarily mean that mortgage rates are going to go in lockstep with it. So if they raise the rate 1%, that doesn't mean that mortgage rates are going to go from 6% to 7%. They might go up a little bit because of that impact, but it has a lot more to do with how many people are buying those mortgage-backed securities. Does that make sense?
Is it still just the private sector buying them?
For the most part, yeah. Yeah.
Is there any news on the government buying them at all?
No, not. I mean, I don't know if there's any kind of policy that they're discussing at this moment that might change that. But right now, no, they're continuing to tighten their monetary policy. They're reducing the amount of mortgage-backed securities that they purchase. The private market is still having to step in to buy the difference. But you got to remember, these guys were making nothing 6 months ago. So the fact that they're actually getting a return now by buying these mortgage-backed securities, the private market doing that,
Yeah.
They don't have a lot to complain about. And I think that a lot of them feel like this higher interest rate environment probably won't be that long. And so they'll be the ones sitting there smiling all day long with a note at 6 or 6.5% or whatever it might be, when mortgage rates drop back down to 5 or something. You know what I mean? So I think that some of the investors are looking at it that way.
It's too bad that there weren't regional interest rates. You know what I mean? Because I was just thinking about, like, somebody could say, hey, you know what? I want to get a loan in the Reading market, because I think the Reading market is still a very good market, even though it's slowed down a little bit.
Yeah.
It's just when you are full throttle in a car, and you're going as fast as the car can go, and suddenly you let off a little bit, and now you're only going 80% of the maximum speed of the car. You're still moving fast.
You're still moving.
But not as fast as you were. It's like we just came out of arguably the hottest market ever.
Yeah.
Interest rates below 3s, people moving here, and we're still not getting replenishment of inventory. In your last market update I watched, we're still considered a seller's market. We're at 2.1 months.
Yeah,
right?
It's in the low 2s. And what Joey's talking about is the overall supply relative to demand and the absorption rate. So anything up to a 3 months supply is considered to be more of a seller's market. And then a 4 to 5 month supply is more of a neutral market. And anything over a 6 month supply is considered to be a seller's market.
Yeah.
And right now we're at like 2.1, 2.2 months supply currently. And that means we're still a seller's market by definition, although I think everybody would agree that we're trending quickly to a neutral market. Inventories today are like 715 total residential units for sale currently. And the numbers aren't out yet because it's not the end of the month, but it's probably going to be 250 to 270 or so for total pendings for the month, which will be down again from the previous month, and certainly down by 30% or more over last year.
Yeah, but to me, that just came out of the hottest market ever.
It did.
I'm still bullish on this market in comparison to other things that are happening.
Yeah, I agree.
But I was on a radio show where we were talking about, and they said it was opinion, but it was like, hey, if you don't own a home, you absolutely should be buying a home, because the things that they talked about the increase in rents over the last 24 months in the local market.
Oh, yeah.
And those were escalating. They were crazy.
Yeah.
Now, if you were talking about, hey, I own 10 residential homes and should I purchase, I have some money, should I purchase 11th or 12th? That's a completely different conversation than, hey, I'm renting a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house for $1,650 a month.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
And that's the kind of numbers that you're hearing.
Yeah.
So it was stuff like that. So it was like, no, I would be very bullish. And the other term that was brought up was the whole, because I love this term, is that you marry the house and you date the interest rate. Like you find your home now, you get settled within 2 years. I mean, we are technically in a recession.
Yep.
Right. So at some point, the 1% is to try to slow down inflation, but fast forward 12 months, 14 months, I have to think that that's going to be, experts think that's going to flip flop a little bit. Okay, interest rates got high, we cooled off inflation, and now we have to bring interest rates back down.
Yeah.
And if you locked in your house now,
I
mean, I still think, there was a big correction because things were just they were ramping up so fast.
Yep.
But what's still the average price of a home in Reading sales last month versus
median sales price right now is hovering in the high 370s, low 380s. But here's the deal: prior to the pandemic, right, we were probably at median sales price was in the 280s, 290s.
Exactly.
So the challenge that we have right now is that pricing got pushed up so high with low interest rates and pretty high demand from relocation and all those other things pushing the demand up. But you had the average sales price or the median sales price pushing up into the 400s, right? But that was based on really low interest rates that was allowing that to happen. Now that rates have went up, you've got buyers that are qualified down here, homes that are being asking prices are up here, and somehow these two things have to reconcile. Either pricing has to come down, or the amount of inventory has to be reduced, or wages have to go up, and rates have to come down. But something has to happen in order for these people to come together. And if that doesn't happen, then what you're going to see is inventory will be price reduced. And to that point, we got D.R. Horton now, which is a national home builder. I think they say America's number one choice or whatever. And
I think that's McDonald's.
Oh, that's McDonald's.
I think they're the
a billion served.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, but it's a good company. I'm not talking about the mechanics of how they run their show, but I think they make good, sound business decisions. They're pretty sure publicly traded, certainly professionally managed, and you've got homes that were priced in the high fours, and we just saw today price reductions on an average of close to 10%. On a lot of different products for that particular developer in Reading right now. So there's a development over on the west side of town that they have about 43 lots or so. And they've already gone in and started price reducing these homes. And they've only been on the market for a few days. So they're not messing around. They're realistic about what the market's doing. And to that point, I was saying, you got asking prices for homes here, buyers qualify down here, and something has to give. And in this case, in the example I'm giving you, the seller decided to bring that price down. And now the buyers, I would imagine, are going to start purchasing because they're going to be reflective of what a buyer can afford. And you're going to see that, I think, going forward as a theme until we start to find that new equilibrium, whatever that might be.
So I wonder, though, if that correction, where the average price will be in about 4 or 5 months.
The median sales price?
Yeah, the median sales price, because it might come off a little bit off now, but still, like you said, pre-pandemic, it was almost $100,000 less.
Yes.
So even if it comes down like $20,000-$30,000, you still look at that.
Still have a big gain.
Yeah, look at that monstrous gains.
Yeah, it's still a gain, and that's an optimistic viewpoint to see, and I totally agree with it in terms of Reading is still we're not overdeveloped. We're certainly not oversupplied. We live in a state that's a pretty cost prohibitive new construction kind of state, and so we don't. Typically California doesn't overbuild, and there's other states in the country right now that have been overbuilding. And I think that as things start to constrict and the demand starts to die off, there's going to be some pretty large inventories. I'll give you an example. I've got a good friend of mine that lives in Phoenix, Arizona, and these numbers I'm going to try to get them the best I can. So, but my recollection of the conversation was, and this is a RE/MAX agent out there, he said 9,000 units. I think it was 120 days ago for sale in Phoenix, and then just 2 weeks ago, 18,000 units for sale. And so their inventory is already doubled, right? That's going to have a corresponding effect on value, because unless demand paces with the supply, the only thing to give in that equation is going to be asking prices, right? So, you look at Reading, I don't think we're immune from that. I'd be foolish, I think, for somebody to say that we were. I do think that if you look historically at the recessions over the last, 30, 40 years, with the exception of 2007, which was funny money, really bad time for policy, for financing. Most of those recessions, they slid into the housing market anyway. It was a 6 to 8 month, little blimp where, things got soft for a period, and then they just started to move up again. And I wouldn't be so surprised to see something similar to that. History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but I think they say that it rhymes. I would agree. It's probably going to be something similar to that coming out of this. And for a lot of buyers, just think about it. Would you rather buy in a housing bubble, which was probably what we were dealing with, potentially running into if we didn't stop, or would you rather be buying in a recession? And when you know that pricing probably is more suppressed than it normally is, and that means there's an upside to the equation longer term.
Now, with a national recession, there's a definition: 2 quarters with negative GDP back to back. Is there a definition? Is there a formal definition for a real estate recession?
No, I think it probably trends along the similar lines. They add one figure in that, as they say, if it changes the value of the asset by up to 10%.
And based on what you just said with D.R. Horton reducing there, that's kind of one of those.
Because recession means nothing to a buyer or seller of a home. What matters is correction, not recession. So a correction typically is defined as something of 10%. Is considered to be a correction. Whether it be positive or negative, it would be a correction. And in this case, we're all contemplating the correction in the negative sense, and that's if pricing were to drop up to 10%, it would be defined as a correction at that point from most economists' perspective.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
Go ahead.
Is there the median price over since January to now? Do you have any idea like what has the median price gone down 5% overall? Like push D.R. Horton out of the picture.
Median sales prices dropped down approximately 10%, I think, if I were to look. Yeah.
Okay, so then there you go.
Yeah.
So that is.
But it's on the median sales price, so it's not necessarily on selling prices. And again, median sales prices for everybody is that median sales price is actually the middle number. So if I had 100 numbers on a piece of paper, number 50 would be the median sales price.
Okay.
Right. And average sales prices, if I were to take the collection of all 100 of those and then combine it and then divided it by 100, that would be the average. So when I talk median, I'm talking about that middle number where half the transactions were done for less and half the transactions were done for more.
And then within that, there's going to be segments that, that there's the lower end of the segment is probably not going to see that reduction because you cannot replace inventory.
Yep.
You can't afford to build $1,000 square foot house in the city of Reading at current cost. I mean, can you build for under 300 square foot when you talk about permits and the purchase of land?
A house that size?
1,000 square feet.
Yeah, that'd be really difficult.
Exactly. So you couldn't build something for 300,000. So any of these houses that sold in the high twos in some of the neighborhoods, I think they didn't see a reduction. They're not going to see. It's the houses maybe that were at, like you said, listed at 500. DR Horton's bringing it down to 450.
Yep.
The 650 down to 610, stuff like that. So even within the market, there's sub markets and segments.
Absolutely. The lower priced homes in the marketplace are going to have a little bit more. They're going to be more insulated to a market disruption because the demand is naturally higher in those price points. Where they get pressure is coming indirectly. So when higher priced properties begin to adjust their prices down, that it just has a compounding effect all the way down the price segment. So, if a 500 becomes a 450 then becomes a 400 becomes a 350 and the 300 and 250, and it just kind of pushes its way down there that way. It doesn't come as fast. In the lower end, for sure. It's a much slower process. And it comes back a lot faster, too, because more people can afford at that price point. So when the market shifts and gets more positive, people, going into the market, as you bring new buyers into the market, they tend to purchase in the lower price point when they're new buyers into the market.
Yeah.
And so the other part that we're going to have a challenge with for a short period of time is just going to be the move up, move down, move sideways transactions where I already own a home. I need to sell it to go buy the next one. Not a lot of that's going to go on right now because they're sitting on a mortgage at 3.25%. Who wants to drop off that and go buy a house at 6%, right?
No, yeah.
And so we're going to have that issue at the moment. But once we get through this transition, I mean, you could see move up, move down, move sideways buyers in addition to new buyers coming into the market. In addition to a fairly low home inventory, because a lot of builders won't be building if they're concerned about pricing. And so you can see real quick how this actually could run up really fast once we, make it through that small recession correction that we're looking at, right?
And I think there's two other factors that are really driving this too that I don't know if we've ever seen before. And one of them is the shortage of labor, and the other is the supply chain disruption. And I don't know the first one, that's a whole different discussion. But the second one, I've seen, I have a friend in roofing, and OSB it was like 37, it went up to 120, then it came down to 41, then it went to, it's all over the place. And so I don't know how much of the supply chain disruption is no, it'll level off, it'll be okay, it'll come back, right? Or it's no, just materials just aren't gonna, those prices, you'll never see those material prices again, right?
Well, to think we're going to go back to pre-pandemic pricing across the board, I don't believe anybody's saying that would be the case. I think there will be some markets that, just out of lack of supply, the pricing is artificially high right now. And once that supply is replenished, it's going to bring the prices down. Lumber is probably one of those where there's some disruption, but there's a lot of speculation. Lumber runs a lot like oil. There's a lot of speculators in lumber. So they buy a lot of futures in that too, and they overpay, and then they hold on it for a while. And so you're going to probably see some shifts in that market. But I just read a Kiplinger letter, which is a pretty good economic forecast. They were talking about the freighters and the cargo ships that are coming across the oceans delivering products and goods and services over to us, right? And when they're coming over right now, the cost for that shipment now has dropped dramatically. I think it's down anywhere between 25 and 50% of what it was. Now, it's still 2 to 3 times higher, though, than what it was prior to the pandemic. That's how much they were gouging people, and that was really, really having an impact on the cost of goods for the United States, right? But you're already seeing the cargo ships pricing dropping now to the point where I would imagine in the next 6-12 months, we probably will have at a more competitive price across the board. Where the real issue showing up in the supply chain now is in the Midwest, where you got all these rail cars now sitting with all the products, sitting on a rail, and the warehouses are still full because the economy is slowing down. And these guys that have bought all this stuff, they're kind of slow to go pick it up from the trains. So now that's the new problem right now is clearing out those rail cars. And
sounds like an A&E new TV reality show.
Well, it just reminds you of traffic. How many times you've gotten into traffic, you're stopped, and all of a sudden when you get past it, you're like, what happened? There's no accident. There was nobody here. And then they're like, oh, well, a half hour ago, some guy cut across 4 lanes and took the exit, and that slowed everybody down. And you're still experiencing all of that, that What's that?
The accordion
the
effect.
accordion effect, right? So I think that's playing into that, but I think supply is catching up.
Okay.
And I would not be surprised if our inflation numbers right now at 9.1, that I'm hopeful that that's the peak, and then we'll actually start to see that number begin to drop.
Well, that's the official number. I'm trying to find
I
something
agree.
that's only gone up 9%.
Yeah, no, I get it. I don't disagree. I think that number is, baked, but as long as they stay consistent with what they're baking that with, I'm saying that if 9.1 is what it is now, I'm hopeful that number will be lower in the future.
And what about labor? That would be the other big one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all of the trades are, it takes a while to replenish those too. They're also something that you just don't flip a switch and go, okay, we got 100 carpenters and 100 plumbers here, no problem.
Yeah.
That one's a tough one too.
Yeah, the labor one's going to hurt.
And I think those are big tailwinds.
Well, I see labor as a headwind, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, because you're thinking of buyers.
Well, what I'm thinking on labor and new construction and things like that is that right now they were competing for labor, driving the cost up, right?
Okay.
And so I guess on the cost of the home, I could see it going down.
That's what I meant.
But I'm thinking about the people that are going to get the conversation by their foremen and their superintendents and their employers that are saying, guys, gals, sorry, but our wages are going to have to get back down to a more competitive pricing. I'm concerned about that. I think some deflation in terms of wages in the construction field are a possibility.
Really?
I do.
And
Yeah.
Okay. See, I was thinking the opposite. I was thinking that all of the people I know, they're still having such a struggle to get labor.
No, that's still an issue right now.
So they have to pay good wages.
But 6 months from now, if there's nothing to do, you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
If there, not nothing, that would be a huge extreme. But if there's less to do, but you still have a lot of labor available to do it, you might make a decision that, hey, I'm going to do that job for a little bit less.
This stuff is so complicated.
I know.
Can we just go back to Sorry or Monopoly? Can we just I'll roll the dice and look, I landed on Baltic. I'll take it. I've got $60.
Well, I think the cost of new construction will be lower in the future.
Okay.
I do. I think that's the bottom line. And it'll be a combined effect of the supply chain catching up, access to materials that, like refrigerators and, appliances that slowed things down. And labor. I think light labor could soften a little bit. I hate to say it, but I think there's a possibility that's the case.
Well, it's always, all these things go up and come down. So it's just
Yeah.
a matter of timing it and how long they're up for and down, everything like that. So, the interest rates are supposed to be raised a point at the end of the month. We're not really sure. It'll probably increase mortgage rates though, but
A little
not.
bit. It won't be
not to
lock and step
extent.
with it. Yeah, I don't think you're going to see a lock and step rate, gets raised by 0.75%, and so the corresponding mortgage rate jumps by 0.75%. I don't see that. I see that if the rate goes up 0.75%, maybe the mortgage rate goes up 0.25%, which still sucks. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I don't know if it's going to be lock and step with the Fed.
With the side, so we're talking all about supply and the effect on supply, but talking about demand, are you seeing less buyers into the market?
Oh yeah, for sure. I would estimate around 20% right now reduction in demand overall right now, which is leaning towards why our inventory is growing a little bit. We are definitely seeing an impact on demand. It's showing up in the numbers now. Our sales report last month reflected it. This month at the end of July, like I said, we'll probably be off roughly 20%.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is this making sellers nervous a little bit?
Sure it is.
Because they were used to just
Well, you couldn't be wrong if you're willing to wait, right? So if you're listing your home over the last 18 months and let's say you overpriced it by 5%, just wait a few months and you'll get your price, right? Where today, if the market does shift and you don't price it correctly on day one, theoretically a month later, you might be doing a price reduction. And that's a huge difference from what it was 6 months ago.
I'm seeing a lot of those, that internal real estate traffic where there is a lot of subject line, price reduced, price reduced, price reduced, price reduced. A lot of that could have been also that, some of the listings I would see them. We talked about this about 3 or 4 episodes ago where I was like, wow, more power to you that you got your agent to list that at that. And they were flying off the shelf, but it caught up. It was just, whatever they thought it was. Hey, just let's go, like you said, 5% higher. We'll get it. Yeah. No, now it's really important to price your home right.
Well, and it always depends with the market, right? Different markets require different approaches. So if you're in a rapid increasing market, if you price a little bit higher than the existing inventory, you're probably going to be okay. But that's not a good practice when the market's flat or shifting, because days on market from the perspective of a buyer, is a concern. So here's an example. For years, I've had sellers ask me, does a price reduction look like I'm desperate? And that's a good question to ask. Our experience has been, because we've asked buyers this very same question for years, and what we've seen is more of a pattern is what we've learned, that price reductions are typically internalized from the buyer's perspective as motivation. Seller's motivated, that's why they drop their price, right? Days on market is typically interpreted as there's something wrong with the property.
Yeah.
And so a seller has to make the decision. Do I look motivated by changing my price, or do I look like there's something wrong with my home by sitting on the market forever, right? And neither one's a good option. I'm not suggesting it is. But you have to kind of look at that and make a realistic assessment of what you should do.
How many, I don't know if you know this stat right now, but days on market is the average? Because that's obviously probably climbing as well, right?
Not as much as I would have thought, actually. It was in the high 70s this last month, in the last month's market update. It'll probably be in the low 80s now. So it's trending that way. Where it's growing a little bit,
that big of a,
but it's not a huge difference yet. No, and partly because we don't have a massive amount of new homes coming to market or resale homes coming to market. Like in 2007-8, like Mike said in his podcast last month, I mean, we had like overnight just massive amounts of inventory just being dumped onto the market. That's not the case right now. We have a very conservative introduction of new inventory to the market every month. So I think we're almost running out of time. Is that right, Marcus? 2 minutes left.
Oh, man, that went fast.
Everybody's watching. You got a 2-minute warning.
You got 2 minutes.
You'll have to put up with us for 2 more minutes.
Red zone.
Yeah.
So, okay. So the bottom line is, yes, the market has come down a little bit. You said you're seeing like 20% less buyers in the marketplace. Yep. In 2022, you'd say there's about a 10% reduction on average of the median price. Yep. Again, the right in the middle of the thing. So, but it's still, I mean, I think these numbers are all like off of the highest, fastest market we ever saw. These are still, like you said, inventory is, it's 2.1. The replenishment rate is 2.1, which is considered a seller's market. Yep. And it would have to get up to 6 months before we would consider that a buyer's market.
Yeah. And you still got to think of it this way. You're either renting or you're buying. Yep. If you're renting, you're paying 100% interest on every month when you make your payment, 100% interest. You're not securing an asset over long term that'll appreciate. You're not having the tax savings for home ownership. You're not being able to kind of control what you want to do with your property and when you want to do it. You have no real protection over somebody evicting you versus owning a home and having the benefits of all the things I just talked about. So, it's a tough decision to make. I would really finish off by saying, if you're thinking about buying a home and staying there for a short period of time, don't buy a home right now. If you're thinking about staying for a period of years, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, you want to stay longer than that, I think you're going to be in good shape long term. So in any case, I think we're almost finished up, but
before we go, is there any resource that somebody could find online that would show the average increase in rent in Redding versus it just being anecdotal, where you talk to people like, I might, is there something like that? Does that exist?
Rentdata.com is something I think will provide some insight into that.
Yeah, because I would like to see what the number is over the last 24 months, because I think it would be shocking.
Yeah. Rentdata.com, I'm pretty sure, is the one. I've got it in our previous market updates on our website at reddinghomes.com. You can watch.
I'll link to it when we publish this.
That sounds great. Let's do that.
Okay. Thank you for your time, Josh. As always, appreciate it.
Always, Joy.
If you guys need a real estate agent, give Josh a call.
Hey, we're here to help. Thanks.
If you're enjoying the All Things Real Estate podcast, please feel free to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.